Can I have just a short replica? Just a short question replica excluded or reaction? Okay. Well, I would like to ask you, do you think that religion can be treated as explanation at all? Like, I mean, in the sense of science, we know what is explanation in science, the explanation of phenomena. Can religion have the same or at least a comparable task of explaining things?
I would answer that by using my analogy. Is Henry Ford an explanation of the motor car in any sense? And the answer is yes, he is. He's an explanation in terms of the genius, the intellect that designed it. I would say there's something exactly parallel to that. That God is, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, the Logos, if you like. That he is the explanation of the fact that there are explanations at the scientific level. So I would advance that as a response to you, but it's not the same kind of explanation. And once it's a personal rather than a mechanism or law explanation. And therefore it fits into a bigger scheme of explanations, and there are others, of course. Does that make sense to you, sir?
Yes, but if you treat religion as a kind of explanation, is it at the end of the day, well, God of the gaps here? Because God of the big gap, because its explanation has a gap, and then I'm not an atheist, but I don't think it's necessary to think of a God as an explainer of things.
But is Henry Ford an explanation of the gaps?
I think it's, well...
You see, what I would say, I mean, there's a lot to this, and this is, to my mind, a very deep and important question. I take it very seriously.
But you see, we know that the car is an artifact. It was designed by someone, by Henry Ford. That's the difference. But we don't know the nature. We don't know if the nature is an artifact of somebody. That's it.
But is there any evidence that it is? That's what I would come back to. I don't want to hog this, sir. That there is evidence that nature, there is design in nature. Now, I qualify that with all kinds of ways and so on. And therefore, it seems to me that science, the doing of science, points to an intelligence. And it's an abductive inference. It's an inference to the best explanation. And for instance, let me give just throw an example into it. We recognize, for instance, when we see text, we immediately infer upwards to intelligent inference, without hesitation. And I would say that a parallel thing can happen. For example, when we respond to the fact that human beings not only encode text in their DNA, but they are creatures capable of producing text. That to me is evidence that whatever other mechanisms and laws are involved, there's an input of intelligence coming from somewhere up there. That's an inference to a best explanation. But I hold it in the context of feeling that the alternative worldview explanation doesn't make any sense at all, which I suspect may be behind the original statement of our chairman, that reductive, extreme reductive materialism doesn't work. That would be part of my evidence, but we've yet to come to that.
Professor Poleg, please continue.
One short remark, and then naturally in science we know different kinds of explanations. Normally, or mostly the idea are the so-called deductive nomothetic explanation, that clearest explanation by natural laws, accidental conditions and so on. But we have also some weaker forms. For example, it's also so-called theological explanation, where we explain by some instrumental some means and aims and so on of someone. For example, if we explain something what happened in society and so on. But the presupposition here is that this person or this maker or this actor is in principle knowable is someone who is near to us. But if we say God created the world, and God is a metaphysical person, this is, it is even excluded for at least a principle, from a near contact with him. No? God as a metaphysical person is something else, radically else. And sometimes we try to put him as an actor in similar kind as Henry Ford. I think this doesn't go. Because Henry Ford could be novel to me. I can go to him to shake his hand and so on, in principle. Even if some Martian will be, okay, in principle, I can meet him. But can I do something like that with God? So on first look, no.
Oh, yes, you can.
Yes. It's a religion is possible in some other religion. No.
Just one sentence. I take your point completely, but there's a presupposition behind it, and that is that God does not reveal himself. And you know, as well as I do, the central table of Christianity is that God is knowable because he's revealed himself. But that's moving on to another trajectory.
A bit later we'll come to this.
Yeah, that's right.
Probably we will continue because let's go further. And the question again for all of you, from your point of view and maybe also worldview, what sort of concept of God do you start from? And also, would you preserve the expression or should it be discarded, replace it? Maybe we can begin with Professor Uršič now.
Maybe Professor Emri, because...
Okay.
Okay, thank you. I think that science and religion are just two sides of the same coin. We should not forget that both approaches are the result of human development. So, religion was developed by people, not by somebody else. Science was developed by us. So it was developed by our brain, and essentially we have in our brain, if you wish, both religion and science. We have cognitive part of brain, which can explain scientifically, step by step. And we have emotional part of our brain that essentially is closer to religion. It explains things that science cannot. I can give you a very good example. If any of us would like to, from a scientific standpoint of view, define a beautiful woman, you cannot. But when you see it, you know immediately. So you don't need science to understand certain things. So emotions, so the other part of us is something that science cannot at the moment, and maybe for a long time will not be able to explain. So in principle, we need both sides of the coin. And once again, I would like to emphasize, forget about institutions that carry out these things, because this is what is mixed. And we should also not forget that emotional part we comprehend, at least we believe that we comprehend much more easier than the scientific part. The scientific part requires certain training. Emotional part is sort of born in. And we should not forget that religion, when it started, education was nowhere. So science was nowhere. So if you don't have education, you don't have science, but you have emotions. So this is historically, this is at least how I see why religion was building up faster than, say, science. And you don't forget that the first scientists, they were both. They were scientists, they were artists, they were poets, they were everything. Later on, this split it, just because very few people can handle everything. See, in most cases, you know, I'm coming more from engineering. We usually are not so good in being poetic. We cannot write poems, we cannot write any other thing, so we are hampered in some sense. And on the other hand, many people that are poets, they are hampered, they are not good in science. So very, very few people have both capabilities. And this is how essentially science and religion started, and they were together in history. Then somehow they split it. And meetings like this essentially try to say, well, these are two different things. But they became different things because religion wrote explanations for everybody, for people that cannot comprehend scientific explanations. But if you of course, if you go to religious as they are, so Christianity and so forth, but these are just like two different languages. This is like saying, whatever, we have Chinese and we have Slovenian. Of course, words are different, but they are trying to explain the same thing. And they are trying to explain the same thing, usually something that they are not capable of explaining. So this is why God has a form of a human being. But if you go to some religions, that's not the case. So not in all religions God has a form of a human being. But as it was suggested, we shouldn't go into comparing the religions, so I will not do that. But once again, I think religion comes from one part which is more emotional, it's more something that uses non-materialistic way of explaining, and science can just come from the other side. But they are, as I said, same two sides of the coin, the same thing. Once again, excluding the institutions that carry this out. That's very important. We have to exclude people.